The air at Highstone Plantation in Georgia didn't just feel heavy, it choked you. It was a thick, wet cover that smelled of burned cotton, wet red dirt, and the sweet, sick rot of dropped magnolia flowers. In the summer of 1852, the quiet of the big house was like a sharp blade, made keener by years of secrets that were finally starting to leak through the floor. Mistress Lydia Highstone was a woman known by what she did not have. Though she sat at the head of a table covered with silver, her life was an empty, fancy prison. She had no children, no joy in her rooms, and most painful of all, no husband who met her eyes. Julian Highstone was a man of hard power, a master who controlled his land with an iron hand, but slipped into the dark corners of his own home whenever his wife came near. Lydia's only joy was her family line. She cared deeply about the signs of riches, shining her position until it gleamed like the family treasure she loved most, a heavy 22-carat gold wedding ring carved with the initials of 3 generations of Highstone women. 3 winters back, that ring had disappeared. Julian said a house thief took it. Lydia spent those years punishing every servant, hunting for the gold she felt held her spirit. She found it on a Tuesday morning in the laundry shed. Sarah, a 19-year-old woman with eyes full of the tired wisdom of many years, was bent over a hot wash tub. Her hands, normally covered in grey soap and rough from hard scrubbing, were deep in the water. But as she reached for a thick linen sheet, the morning sun caught a bright yellow flash, a shine of gold that did not fit in a shed of wood and ash. Lydia, standing in the doorway, felt her heart turn cold. "Stand up, Sarah," she whispered, her voice a low, threatening sound that cut through the bubbling water. Sarah froze. She did not look up right away, but the way her shoulders tightened told Lydia all she needed. Slowly, Sarah stood, her wet hands dripping onto the dirt floor. On her left ring finger, tied tight with a piece of string so it would not fall off, was the Highstone ring. "Where did you get that?" Lydia stepped closer, her pale face pulling tight until it looked like cracked plaster. "I spent 3 years believing a common thief stole my mother's treasure. Did you take it from my jewelry box, you miserable girl?" Sarah did not shake. She had a quiet pride that Lydia found more painful than any theft. "I did not steal it, mistress," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. "Then how does a slave wear the ring of the woman who owns her?" Lydia rushed forward, grabbing Sarah's wrist with strength born of pure jealousy. She tried to pull the ring off, but the string held strong. "The master gave it to me," Sarah said. Her eyes met Lydia's with sad, honest truth. The silence that came after was worse than any whip. Lydia's hand loosened and dropped. The painful trap of her marriage had just closed tight. Julian had not lost the ring to a thief. He had given the sign of Lydia's position to the woman who washed in her laundry. "You lie," Lydia breathed, though she knew the truth was as real as the gold on Sarah's finger. "He would never. You are just property. He gave it to me the night my son was born," Sarah went on, her voice falling to a soft, sad rhythm. "The son, he told you, died at birth. The son he has kept hidden in the cabin by the creek for 3 years. Lydia stepped back, hitting the rough wood wall of the shed. Her husband had not only cheated on her, he had built a secret family right under her eyes. The son she prayed for, the heir she never had, lived in a shack, and the woman who gave birth to him wore the ring Lydia used to marry the man who left her. In that moment, Lydia Highstone wanted more than the ring back. She wanted to wipe away every sign of Sarah, but she was a smart hunter. She knew selling Sarah would let Julian bring her back. She needed to break their connection, to show Sarah was the thief she called her. "You think that gold makes you his wife?" Lydia spat, her eyes narrowing to thin blue ice. "It makes you a mark. I give you until sunset to give me that ring. If it is not on my vanity by dark, I will have the overseer tear up the floorboards of your cabin, and we both know what else is hidden there, don't we?" Sarah's face finally turned pale. She knew Lydia was not only talking about the child. Under the loose boards of her cabin lay a bundle of freedom papers, letters Julian wrote promising Sarah and the boy their liberty in Philadelphia once he paid his debts. If Lydia found those, Julian's shield would break, and Sarah would be sent to the cane fields far south, away from her son. Lydia turned and walked out of the laundry, her silk skirts hissing like snakes. She went straight to the house, her mind full of dark plans. She was not going to her room. She was going to Julian's study. She needed to find the ledger that showed Julian was broke, a secret she had guessed for months. Sarah stood in the steam of the laundry, her hand shaking as she touched the gold band. She had worn it as a promise, a small light in her dark life. Now it was a rope around her neck. As the sun started its slow orange drop over the Georgia pines, the first slow ring of the plantation bell marked the end of work. But for Sarah, the real struggle was only starting. She had to reach the floorboards before Lydia. She had to choose if she would keep the gold or save her child. Under the floorboards of the big house, something else waited. A secret Julian kept even from Sarah, a last will from his father that said no Highstone could own land if they fathered children they did not free. The golden betrayal was about to turn into a fight of ink, blood, and flames. The shadow of the Highstone mansion stretched over the yard like a bony hand as the sun sank behind the sharp pines. Inside the big house, the air felt still, smelling of beeswax and the sharp bite of Julian's fine bourbon. Lydia Highstone did not wait for sunset. Her anger was alive, a cold flame that burned through her blood, leaving her skin white and her eyes hard as broken glass. She walked fast toward the row of small, worn cabins at the edge of the land, her silk skirts catching on thorns and branches along the path. She did not care about ruining her fine clothes. She only cared about saving her pride. She reached Sarah's cabin, a simple building of rough logs and mud, and kicked the door open so hard the crickets went quiet in fear. Inside smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the faint sweet smell of a child. Lydia's stomach turned at that smell. It was the scent of the motherhood she never had, a smell that felt like a personal insult in this empty home. She did not search for jewels or silver. She went straight to the floorboards near the small cold fireplace. Using a heavy iron poker she found by the hearth, Lydia started prying at the rough wood. The boards creaked and broke under her wild strength. Finally, near a worn rug, a board came loose. Under it lay a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth stained with red Georgia mud. Lydia's fingers shook as she opened it. Inside were not only letters, but a legal paper, a freedom deed, signed and witnessed, giving Sarah and a child named Toby their full freedom. The date on the paper was from 3 years ago, the same week Laddie was told Sarah's baby died. "You coward," Lydia whispered into the empty room, her voice trembling with grief and jealousy. "You hid them here while I cried over our empty nursery." Outside, the heavy sound of horse hooves told of Julian's return from town. Lydia did not move. She sat on the dirt floor of the cabin, the freedom papers in one hand and the heavy gold wedding ring, which she had taken from Sarah's wrist earlier in the laundry, in the other. When Julian stepped into the cabin minutes later, his face showed tiredness and hidden guilt. He stopped in the doorway, the fading light outlining his tall shape. He looked at the broken floorboards, the papers in Lydia's lap, and the ring shining in the dim light. "Lydia," he said, his voice a low warning, "is this why the creditors are at the gates, Julian?" Lydia stood, her face a pale mask of pain. "Because you spent our money building a hidden family in the woods? Because you gave my mother's ring to a woman who scrubs our floors?" Julian stepped inside, the smell of dust and horse sweat on him. "I gave her that ring because she gave me the one thing you could not, Lydia, a son. A legacy that is not made of cold stone and empty names." Lydia's laugh was sharp and broken, echoing off the logs. "A legacy? He is a slave, Julian. By law, he is no more your heir than the mules in the barn, and these papers, they mean nothing if I burn them before the judge sees them. If you touch those papers, I will lose the plantation," Julian said, his eyes turning dark with fear. "The bank only gave me the last loan because I showed I was freeing my debts to move north. If they learn I lied about the child's death, they will take everything by morning." "Then let it burn," Lydia spat, her jealousy finally exploding. "I would rather beg in the streets than live in a house built on your lies." While the masters argued in the cabin, Sarah was already moving through the dark swamp by the creek. She carried Toby, a small, sleepy boy of 3, his arms tight around her neck. The air in the swamp was thick with damp moss and the iron smell of slow water. Every twig snap sounded like a shot to her ears. Every owl cry felt like a sign to the overseer. She had seen Lydia head for the cabins and knew her time was gone. She had no papers now, and the ring, the only thing Julian gave her that felt like protection, was lost. She only had the fighting spirit her mother whispered to her before she was sold south. "Hush now, Toby," she whispered, her voice a quick, desperate prayer. "We're going to the hollow tree, just like our game." She reached the big lightning-scarred cypress in the middle of the marsh. Its trunk was a dark hollow of wet bark and shadows. She placed Toby inside, giving him a small piece of cornbread. "Stay here. Make no sound. No matter what you hear," she told him, her eyes full of motherly fire. She turned back toward the plantation, her mind full of hard choices. She could not leave Toby there forever. And she knew Lydia would send the dogs once the fight with Julian ended. She had to get those papers back, or at least destroy Lydia's proof of the child's life. As she reached the clearing, she saw the hidden church members, the other enslaved men and women, standing in the shadows of the tool shed, their faces pale and watchful in the moonlight. They knew the secret family was now known. "Sarah, go back," old Silas whispered from the dark. "The mistress has the torch. She's heading for the laundry." Sarah's heart stopped. The laundry was not only her workplace, it was where Julian hid the ledger of his debts, the only thing that kept the bank from taking the land right away. Lydia was not only trying to destroy Sarah, she was trying to burn the whole Highstone world to punish the man who betrayed her. The first orange glow of fire started licking the corners of the laundry shed, throwing long, twisted shadows across the red dirt. The laundry shed did not just burn, it screamed. The dry old wood of the walls gave in to the heat, with sharp cracks like breaking bones in the night. A tall column of orange and black smoke rose to the stars, hiding the moon and dropping hot, glowing bits of ash on the watching crowd of enslaved families. The air was thick with the choking smell of burning lye, scorched cloth, and bitter pine from the building. Lydia Highstone stood at the edge of the heat, the orange light dancing on her face until she looked like a statue made of cooling lava. In her hand she still held the heavy gold ring, its metal growing warm from the fire close by. Her jealousy had finally spoken, and it sounded like a roaring fire. To her, this was not just a shed burning, it was the burial of Sarah's place and Julian's betrayal. "It's gone, Sarah," Lydia shouted over the fire roar as she saw the younger woman step from the dark trees. "Every paper, every lie he wrote to you, it's all turning to smoke." Sarah reached the clearing, her chest rising fast, her eyes wide with fear deeper than the flames. She did not look at Lydia, her eyes fixed on the corner of the shed where Julian kept a small iron lockbox hidden behind a loose stone in the chimney. That box held more than debts. It held the only record of the creekside cabin and proof of Toby's father, the boy Sarah. Lydia hissed, stepping closer, her face lit by a sudden burst as the roof fell in. "Did you think he could hide in the swamp forever? Once this is done, the overseer takes the dogs to the water. A secret family cannot live without a roof." Julian Highstone arrived a moment later, his horse covered in white foam, its eyes wild with fear of the fire. He jumped down before the horse stopped, his boots kicking red Georgia dust as he ran to the blaze. "Lydia, what have you done?" he roared, grabbing his wife by the shoulders and shaking her. "I have saved your soul, Julian," she screamed back, her voice rough from smoke. "I have burned the cruel trap you made for us. Now there is honor. You and me, and the name we share." Julian did not answer. He looked at the laundry shed, the heat so strong that grass 10 feet away was turning brown. He looked at Sarah, standing still like a pillar of sorrow. He knew if that lockbox was lost, the bank would come by noon the next day, and Sarah and Toby would be taken as things to sell in Savannah. With a desperate cry, Julian pulled off his heavy coat and soaked it in a nearby water trough. "Master, no!" old Silas shouted from the crowd. But it was too late. Julian threw the wet wool over his head and ran into the doorway just as the main beam started to groan. Inside was a swirling hell of orange heat and thick grey smoke. He moved toward the chimney, his hands burning as he pulled at the hot stones. He found the iron box, the metal so hot it hissed on his wet sleeve. Outside, Sarah stepped toward the flames, her hand reaching out as if to pull him back. Lydia watched with shocked interest, her jealousy turning to cold, empty fear. She had not meant to kill him, she only meant to kill the woman he loved. A huge crash shook the ground as the roof fell. A cloud of sparks flew up, and for a moment there was only the wind and fire sound. Then a shape came out from the side of the building, clothes smoking, hair burned short. Julian fell to the red clay, the iron box tight to his chest. Sarah reached him first, her hands hovering over his burned skin, afraid to touch and hurt more. I have it, Julian gasped, smoke rough in his lungs. He opened the latch with raw black fingers. When the lid came up, he did not take the debt ledger. He took a heavy leather folder, the final will of his father, the one he hid under the big house floor for years before moving it here to keep safe. "Read it, Lydia," Julian whispered, pushing the folder to his wife as she knelt in the dirt beside them. Lydia took the papers, her eyes reading by the dying firelight. Her face went from pale to ghostly white. The paper said the Highstone land was never really Julian's. His father, a man with his own secret regrets, had written that the plantation must be broken up and the money used to move the enslaved families north after Julian's death, or if Julian tried to sell any child born on the property. By trying to destroy Toby, Lydia had set off the rule that would take everything from her. "You see," Julian coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth. "The signs of wealth you loved so much. It was a fancy prison for me too. I was not just hiding a son, Lydia. I was trying to keep the land long enough to save him without leaving you poor." The fire slowed, leaving black burned beams and thick grey ash. The ashes of the old promises lay scattered across the yard. Sarah stood, her eyes turning to the dark, quiet swamp. The dogs had not come yet, but she knew the overseer waited for orders. "Julian," she said, her voice strong like a mother's steel, "the bank will not care about your father's will. They only care about the ledger. And the ledger is gone." She was right. The money records that kept the creditors away had turned to smoke. The secret family was no longer secret. They were now runaways in a world ready to sell them. Lydia stood, the wedding ring still in her hand. She looked at the ring, then at Julian's burned body, and finally at Sarah. The jealousy was still there, a bitter fire in her stomach, but now it was covered by the hard truth of her own ruin. The Georgia marsh was a place of still water and complete frightening quiet. Under the tangled willows and hanging moss, the air was thick wet heat and the sharp smell of rotting plants. Sarah moved through knee-deep mud, each step fighting the pull of black sludge. She did not dare light a lamp. The only light came from far lightning flashes that turned the swamp into silver and black. Behind her, the first long sad howls of bloodhounds cut the dark wet night. It was a sound that shook her bones, a steady call of the hunt. Overseer Holloway was not a kind man. He was a hunter who loved the chase more than catching. "I'm coming for you, girl." His voice floated through the trees, twisted by fog until it sounded like the marsh speaking. "And I'm coming for that little piece of property you think you've hidden." Sarah reached the lightning-scarred cypress, her breath short and painful. She leaned on the rough, cold bark, fingers shaking as she reached into the hollow. Toby was there, quiet and wide-eyed, his small face a pale shape in the dark. He did not cry. Julian's son had learned young that silence was his only shield. "Come here, baby," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. She pulled him out, holding his small, warm body against her mud-covered chest. She felt his fast heartbeat against hers. Back at the smoking ruins of the laundry, Lydia Highstone stood frozen. The fire was now red, glowing coals throwing hellish light over Julian's burned still body. The final will she found lay at her feet, edges curling in the heat. She looked at the gold wedding ring in her palm. It felt too heavy, the weight of 3 generations of Highstone pride that had become chains. She saw that with the ledger gone and Julian dying, she was no longer mistress of a fancy prison. She was the widow of a broken ghost. "Ma'am?" a voice asked from the dark. It was Holloway's helper, a young man with a blank face. "The overseer says to ask if you want the boy brought back to the big house or taken straight to the trader's pen in town. He says the bankman is already at the front gate." Lydia looked at the house, the signs of wealth now circled by creditors. She thought of the empty nursery for 10 years. Then she thought of the boy in the woods, the only living part of Julian left. A strange, cold, clear thought came over her. She was not acting from love for Sarah or even Julian. She was acting from a last desperate need to take back her own power from a world trying to sell her life for nothing. "Wait," Lydia said, her voice harp and in charge again. "Tell Holloway to hold. I will go to the marsh myself." "But ma'am, the mud, the dogs." "I don't care about the mud," Lydia snapped, her blue eyes flashing with sudden fire. "I am the mistress of Highstone, and I will decide the fate of my husband's property." Sarah heard the splash of heavy boots long before she saw the light. Holloway was near, his lantern swinging wide and sending long twisted shadows over the cypress roots. "I see you, Sarah," he shouted. The hounds pulled hard on their leashes, their barks a wild wall of noise in the swamp quiet. Sarah backed into the water, holding Toby so tight the boy winced. She reached the edge of a deep black pool, the water where alligators waited. There was nowhere left to go. Holloway stepped into the clearing, his face sweaty with cruel victory. He raised his whip, the leather hissing in the wet air. "Give me the boy, girl. You can't save a secret that's already out. Stop." The order did not come from Sarah. Lydia Highstone stepped from the mist, her fine silk dress ruined, the bottom covered in black marsh mud. She looked like a ghost of high society, her face pale and set. Holloway lowered his whip, eyes narrow with confusion. "Mistress, you shouldn't be out here." "The bankman waits at the house for the boy's papers. The bankman waits for a debt that no longer exists," Lydia said, her voice calm and steady in the dark. She walked past Holloway, standing between the overseer and the woman who wore her ring. She looked at Sarah, really looked, and saw not a thief, but the mother of Julian's son. "Holloway, go back to the house," Lydia ordered. "I can't do that, ma'am." The man spat, his greed stronger than respect. "That boy is worth $500 on the block. The master's debts are my problem too if I don't get paid." "You want payment?" Lydia asked. She held up her hand. In the lantern light, the gold wedding ring shone with bright amber light. "This ring is solid gold, 22 carat, Lydia said, her voice low. "It is worth more than $500 in Savannah. It is the legacy of the Highstones. Take it, and you tell the bankman the child drowned in the marsh. Tell them Sarah is gone too." Holloway froze. His sharp eyes moved from the gold to the dark water. He knew the final will would tie the plantation in court for years, but the ring was cash he could hide. "You'd give up your marriage ring for a slave boy?" Holloway asked, his voice full of new respect. "I'm giving up a sign of a lie for the only truth I have left," Lydia said, and for the first time, her jealousy seemed to melt into sad peace. She threw the ring. It flashed in the light for a second before Holloway caught it. He bit the metal, nodding slowly. "The boy drowned," Holloway repeated, his voice cold and businesslike. And Sarah followed him into the black water. "I'll take the hounds back." He turned and vanished into the fog, the sad howls of the dogs fading until only the wind moved the moss. Sarah stepped out of the water, her legs shaking so hard she almost fell. She looked at Lydia, the woman who had been her enemy for years, and saw someone new. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice thin. Lydia did not look at her. She looked at the hollow tree where Sarah hid the child. "Julian is gone, Sarah," Lydia said, the words like ash, "and the house will be gone by sunrise. I have nothing left to own and you have nothing left to hide." Under the floorboards of that mansion there were never ghosts, only the silence of two women who... Savannah in 1853 was a city of salt, iron, and heavy, beautiful heat. The air smelled of salty marshes, roasting coffee, and the thick syrup of river paddle-wheelers on the Savannah River. For Sarah and Toby, every cobblestone felt like a trap, and every shadow of a carriage seemed to hide a slave-catcher. They lived in quiet fear, even here, hidden in a small room above a baker's shop in the colored area, where oven heat rose through the floor like a constant memory of the Highstone fire. Sarah found Julian's brother, Thomas Highstone, in a tall brick office near the water. Unlike Julian, Thomas was a man of sharp lines and tired eyes, a fighter who had left the plantation life long ago to work in sea law. When he first saw Toby standing small and brave in the dim office light, his eyes just like Julian's, Thomas sat down and cried. "He's a Highstone, Sarah," Thomas whispered, his hand near the boy's head. "And in this state, that makes him the most dangerous secret in Georgia." For a year, Thomas worked in secret, using the final will to slow the creditors, but the signs of wealth were hard to break. By spring of 1853, the bank's lawyers had followed the trail of the secret family to the baker shop. The last fight did not happen in a big courtroom, but in Thomas's private study, a room smelling of old paper and sharp ink. 3 men from the bank sat across the dark wood desk, their faces cold as their record books. "The boy is property of the estate, Mr. Highstone," the lead lawyer said, his voice dry. "We have witnesses from the plantation who say he was fathered by your brother. That makes him ours to pay Julian's debts, and the woman Sarah, she is a runaway." Thomas leaned forward, hands together on the desk. The boy is free by his grandfather's will, and the woman was freed the moment she crossed the creek head. "You have no proof of that," the lawyer snapped. "The freedom papers were said to be lost in the fire. We have the overseer's word that Sarah and the child drowned." "If they drowned," Thomas said, a slow, dark smile on his face. "Then explain this." He reached into a small velvet bag and took out a heavy gold object. It caught the sun through the window, shining bright amber. It was the Highstone wedding ring. The lawyers stopped. They knew the ring's story. It was the sign of the family's legal place in Georgia. "Holloway, the overseer, was arrested in Savannah 3 days ago trying to sell this," Thomas explained, his voice steady. "In his confession to city guard, he admitted he did not find this ring in the river. He said Mistress Lydia Highstone gave it to him as a bribe to let a free woman and her son go." The room went quiet, except for the tick of a tall clock in the corner. "A mistress does not bribe an overseer to steal property," Thomas went on. "She gives a gift to keep families safe. By giving up this ring, Lydia Highstone legally accepted Sarah and Toby's freedom. She chose the child over the debt, and under Georgia law, a widow's gift of her own personal property, which this ring was, is a real act of freedom." The bank's lawyers looked at the ring, then at each other. They were smart hunters, but they knew when a trap turned against them. If they fought Thomas now, they would fight the word of a Highstone widow and the hard proof of the family's most important heirloom. "Fine," the lead lawyer spat, standing and closing his book hard. "The boy is a ghost, but the plantation is ours. Tell the widow she has until month's end to leave the cottage." A month later, a small carriage stopped at a plain white house on the edge of Savannah. The air here was fresh, smelling of salt grass and blooming jasmine on the porch rails. Sarah stepped out holding Toby's hand. She no longer wore rags. She had a simple blue cotton dress, her head uncovered, showing the strength and grace of a woman finally free. Standing on the porch was Lydia Highstone. She looked older, the smooth face now lined with weariness. She was no longer queen of the big house, but a woman in a small 4-room home with no helpers. Her jealousy had turned to quiet, plain dignity. "Thomas told me you were coming," Lydia said, her voice soft but firm. Sarah walked up the steps, stopping a few feet away. She took the gold ring from her pocket. Thomas had given it back after the hearing. "This belongs to you," Sarah said, holding it out. "It was your mother's. It's the legacy of your house." Lydia looked at the ring, the gold shining in the amber afternoon light. For a long moment, the two women, the secret wife and the legal widow, stood in heavy silence, the history of Highstone Plantation between them. Finally, Lydia shook her head. "No," Lydia said, closing Sarah's fingers over the gold. "I used that ring to hold a lie for 10 years. You used your heart to save a son. Keep it, Sarah. Give it to Toby when he grows up. Let it be the ring of a free family, not the chain of a fancy prison." Lydia looked at Toby, who watched a butterfly in the garden. "He has Julian's eyes,"